Have you ever wondered what a man says when he knows these are his final words? Not the words of a hero, not a victory speech, but the quiet confession of someone who's seen too much and can't live with it anymore. This is the last recording of a sniper who spent his life in silence, hidden behind the scope of a rifle, watching lives disappear through glass. And now, with hands that no longer stop trembling, he presses record. One last time. If you find this tape, he says, his voice barely standing above the static, it means I couldn't forgive myself. There's something haunting in that line, isn't there? The kind of sentence that stays in your mind long after the words fade. You can almost hear the wind scraping against the broken window of the room where he's hiding, smell the cold metal of the weapon that once made him feel invincible. But now, it's just a reminder, a symbol of everything he wishes he could forget. He doesn't speak to the world, he speaks to the ghosts, to the faces he's seen through the crosshead, to the souls that never stop staring back. Every shot, he whispers, took something from me. Stay with me until the end. Because what you're about to hear isn't a story about war. It's a story about what war does to a man, how it eats away at his soul until all that's left is the echo of his own guilt. This isn't the sound of gunfire, it's the sound of conscience. He talks about the silence that followed each mission, a silence so heavy it could crush him. The laughter of his brothers in arms, now replaced by static, the only company left to remind him that he's still breathing, for now. And yet, even in that silence, he hears something else, the faint voices of those he silenced forever. You've probably heard stories of soldiers, of bravery, of survival, but not this one. This is the story they never tell, the one where the killer becomes the confessor, the one where the war doesn't end when the bullets stop flying. He pauses. You can hear his breath shaking. A man who's seen death 1,000 times, but now, for the first time, fears it. And in that trembling voice, between words and regret, lies a truth that can't be erased. What did he see that broke him? What memory refuses to die? The tape keeps rolling, and what comes next will change the way you see war forever. He hesitates before speaking again, and for a moment, you can almost feel his loneliness through the crackling of the tape. There's no one left to listen to. Him out there, no comrades, no enemies, just the ghosts he carries. And somehow, his voice feels like it's reaching through time, searching for someone who will finally hear what he has to say. Maybe that someone is you. If this story is touching something inside you, if you've ever felt the weight of regret or the silence of your own thoughts, share it with me in the comments. Tell me what part of his confession spoke to you. Sometimes, just putting it into words is enough to lift a little of that weight, and who knows, your words might reach someone else who needs to hear them too. Leave a like if this story has moved you so far. It might seem like a small thing, but it tells me that these voices, these forgotten confessions, still matter. Every like helps this channel reach more people who, just like you, believe that even the darkest stories deserve to be heard. And if you want to keep uncovering these lost memories, the ones hidden between guilt, love, and redemption, consider subscribing. That single gesture tells me you want to walk deeper into these human stories, where emotion and silence say more than words ever could. Because in the end, this isn't just my story to tell, it's ours to remember. He exhales again, softly. The sound of rain against the roof returns. The tape continues spinning, and his voice grows quieter, as if he's sinking back into the past, ready to reveal what really happened that day. The silence after the last shot was never peaceful. It wasn't the kind of silence that brings calm. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, pressing against his ears until even his own heartbeat felt like an intruder. He said it was louder than any explosion he had ever heard. Out there, on the rooftop of a ruined city, the world seemed frozen in time. Smoke rose like ghosts, curling around shattered buildings, while the air still tasted of metal and burnt dust. The smell of iron lingered, not just from the weapon but from something far more human. He used to think distance would protect him, that being a sniper meant staying untouched by what happened down there. But as the years went by, he realized the opposite was true. Every pull of the trigger carved a mark he couldn't see, a quiet wound that bled inside his mind. No one warned him that killing from afar doesn't make you distant from the pain, it only makes you the sole witness to it. He said the waiting was the hardest part, the endless hours staring through the scope. Trapped in a still frame between life and death, the mind starts to wander in those moments, to question, to remember, to imagine who the person on the other side might be. A father, a son, someone who also thought they were doing the right thing. That's when the detachment begins to crack, and the silence becomes unbearable. He tried to distract himself with routine, counting bullets, cleaning the rifle until it gleamed like a mirror. But that mirror only reflected his own eyes, and there was something different in them now. Something hollow. The kind of emptiness that grows when you realize the world no longer feels solid under your feet. The battlefield wasn't just out there anymore, it had moved inside him. There's a kind of transformation that happens in war, but not the kind you see in movies. It's not about courage or sacrifice. It's about what happens when you lose the part of yourself that could still feel. He once believed he was defending something greater than himself. A flag, a cause, a promise. But now, in the echo of that silence, He couldn't even remember what that promise was. He began to notice small details he'd never seen before, a photograph half buried in rubble, the sound of a music box still playing somewhere in a destroyed home, little reminders that life had existed there once, and every reminder became another weight he had to carry. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because beneath that silence, beneath the steel and smoke, there was a truth he tried to bury, a revelation that would change everything he thought he knew about what it means to survive. He said it happened on a day like any other, the kind of gray morning that smelled of rain and gunpowder. He had been in position for hours, motionless, his body blending with the stones and dust. Through the scope, the world looked small, fragile, almost unreal. That glass lens had always been his shield, a way to separate himself from what he did. But that day, something changed. The target came into view, a young soldier barely old enough to shave, holding his rifle like it was heavier than he was. The sniper steadied his breath, his finger hovering over the trigger, but for the first time, his hand refused to obey. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the boy looked around, lost and trembling, or the way his lips moved as if whispering a prayer. And then, from somewhere deep inside, he heard it, a voice that didn't sound like his own. Soft, fragile, yet impossibly clear. What if he had a mother too? The thought cut through the fog like a blade. In that instant, the target stopped being a silhouette. He became someone, a name, a story, a life that would never unfold if he pulled the trigger. He froze, trapped between instinct and conscience. The training screamed one thing, the heart whispered another. And that's when the real war began, not out there, but inside his own chest. Because once you hear that voice, once you question what you're doing, there's no turning back. You can't silence it. It lingers, echoing through every mission, every shot, every night you try to sleep. That single moment became the first crack in his armor, the fracture that let all the buried emotions start to surface. He said he began to notice how his pulse raced before every shot, not from fear, but from guilt. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about consequence. Every decision carried weight. Every life taken left something behind. Something unseen, but deeply felt. He used to think he could keep those feelings locked away, hidden behind discipline and orders. But guilt has a strange way of finding its voice. It speaks when you least expect it, in the rustle of the wind, in the click of the rifle's bolt, in the silence that follows the recoil. That voice inside him started to grow louder, asking questions he didn't want to answer. Who was he fighting for? What had he become? And why did the faces of the fallen keep appearing behind his closed eyes? He realized that the battlefield wasn't defined by lines or flags. It existed within him, a space where every action left a scar that no one else could see. His mind became the terrain of his own conflict, one that no medal could redeem, no command could erase. That was the beginning of his transformation, the slow unraveling of a man who once believed he was in control. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because what happened after that hesitation revealed a truth far more brutal than any bullet, a revelation that would shatter the very idea of who he thought he was. He said the mission was supposed to be simple. In war, simplicity often means destruction, a single order, a confirmed target. Nothing personal, nothing to think about. The kind of operation he'd done 100 times before, where the line between duty and morality had long been blurred. The command came through his earpiece like a whisper from another world. Target, confirmed, proceed, and just like that, everything that would come to haunt him began. He adjusted the scope, saw the figure moving across the ruins below, and focused. The man was alone, walking slowly, one hand clutching a small bag against his chest. He didn't look like a soldier. No uniform, no weapon in sight. Just an ordinary man crossing a street torn apart by violence. Still, the coordinates matched. The voice in his ear pressed again, colder this time. Take the shot. He hesitated. For a second, that same hesitation he thought he'd buried long ago. But the rules of war don't leave room for conscience. So he did what he was trained to do. He exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and watched the man fall without a sound. A clean hit, efficient. And yet, instead of relief, all he felt was a strange emptiness spreading through his chest. Something about it didn't sit right. When the area was declared secure, he descended from his position to confirm the kill. The air was thick with dust, and the ground still vibrated from distant artillery. He approached the body with mechanical steps, but the closer he got, the heavier his legs felt. The man's hand was still gripping the bag. He pried it open and froze. Inside, there wasn't a weapon or any classified document, just a worn-out notebook, stained with blood and dust. He opened it, and what he saw inside would follow him for the rest of his life. Pages filled with pencil drawings, a small house with a fence, a girl playing in a garden, a man and a child holding hands under a tree. Simple, innocent sketches, the kind only a father could make for his daughter. There was a note on the last page, barely legible through the smudges. I'll be home soon. The sniper dropped to his knees. His rifle fell beside him. For a moment the world around him vanished. The explosions, the orders, the war. All he could hear was the beating of his heart and the echo of that single shot replaying in his mind. He realized that in trying to serve a cause, he had erased one. In obeying orders, he had destroyed someone's entire world. That day, the mission ended, but something inside him never did. It became the moment that divided his life in two before and after the notebook. The point where obedience turned into guilt and purpose dissolved into shame. From that day forward, every time he looked through a scope, he no longer saw enemies. He saw families, faces, stories. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because what he discovered after that mission, and the way he tried to live with it, exposes a hidden truth about the human mind, about how guilt reshapes our entire perception of right and wrong. He said he couldn't bring himself to leave the notebook behind. It was the only thing untouched by the destruction, something too fragile to belong to that place. He sat in the corner of a half-collapsed wall, knees drawn close, and opened it again, as if hoping the words would change, but they didn't. They were still there, quiet, simple, devastating. "My dear Anna," the first line read, "I dreamt of your laughter last night. The world feels colder without it." He turned the page with shaking hands. "I'll be home soon, little one. Be brave for me." The ink had bled in places, mixing with the man's blood, as if the letter itself had been wounded. The sniper read those words aloud, his voice breaking in the empty street. For the first time, he wasn't reading the letter of another man, he was reading his own confession through someone else's words. Each sentence seemed to echo back at him, not from the notebook, but from somewhere inside. He realized he hadn't just ended a life. He had erased a future, 1,000 small moments that would never exist. The drawings that once brought joy to a child were now the evidence of a crime that no one would ever record. He said he started to imagine the little girl, her face, her eyes, the sound of her laugh. He wondered how old she might be, if she waited by the window every evening, counting the days until her father returned. That thought alone became unbearable. In his mind, he saw himself knocking on her door, handing her the notebook, and trying to explain the unexplainable. What could he possibly say? That it was a mistake, that he was following orders? That's the moment he understood the truth. There is no such thing as just a soldier. Every man who carries a weapon also carries a choice, and every choice leaves a scar. From that day, something inside him shifted. He began to see his missions differently, not as victories, but as quiet tragedies unfolding behind the lens. The notebook became his shadow, following him everywhere, a reminder that the enemy he hunted was no different from himself. He started to realize he wasn't fighting for peace anymore. He was fighting to forget, and the more he tried to bury the memory, the deeper it carved itself into his mind. He stopped writing his own letters home. He said it felt wrong, like he had lost the right to speak of love or hope. His world had turned into a mirror, and every reflection showed the same face, a man who could never undo what he'd done. The war no longer felt like an external force. It had moved into him, settling behind his eyes. He became a ghost in his own story, haunted not by what he saw, but by what he caused. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because the way he carried that notebook and the transformation it triggered reveals an uncomfortable truth about the human soul, about how guilt and conscience can rewrite the meaning of survival itself. He said that after that day, sleep became a battlefield of its own. Every night, when his eyes closed, the scope returned. The circle of glass hovered in the darkness like a curse, and through it, he saw the faces again, not of soldiers, not of enemies, but of ghosts. They didn't speak. They just stared back silently, accusing him of remembering too late. He tried to tell himself they weren't real, just tricks of a tired mind, but deep down he knew they were the echoes of something unfinished, the souls that refused to be forgotten. The rifle, once his source of control, had turned into a relic of guilt. He used to hold it with pride, the weight of it reassuring, almost sacred. Now that same weight felt unbearable. Every scratch on the barrel told a story he didn't want to hear. It was no longer a weapon. It was a diary written in silence, a record of choices that could never be undone. He said he started to notice how his hands trembled whenever he cleaned it, as if the metal itself was judging him. It was strange. The rifle had saved his life countless times, yet now it was the very thing that kept him from living. He described how the sound of the trigger haunted him more than the sound of explosions. A click could wake him from sleep, heart racing, sweat soaking through his shirt. He would reach for the weapon by instinct, then freeze, realizing there was no war around him anymore, only memory. That was the cruelest truth of all. The war had ended outside, but inside it never stopped. His mind had become its own theater of conflict, a place where remorse replayed every moment in slow motion. He said that people often believe guilt fades with time. It doesn't. It changes shape. It becomes part of you, woven into every thought, every breath. It hides behind routine, behind laughter, behind the illusion of normality. But then something, a sound, a smell, a reflection brings it all back. The crosshair never really disappears. It just waits for your eyes to find it again. That's when he realized he wasn't just haunted by the dead, he was haunted by the version of himself that once believed he was righteous. He began to understand the truth hidden behind every uniform, that war doesn't choose its victims by side. It consumes everyone who steps into it. The soldier, the civilian, the child, all caught in the same invisible web of loss, The rifle might have given him power, but that power came with a price, a debt written in souls. And the cruel irony was that the only person left to collect it was him. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because what he learned from that burden, the way it reshaped his mentality and twisted his understanding of redemption, exposes something far darker than the violence itself, the silent war that begins only after the last shot is fired. He said the first time he pressed record, it wasn't to leave a message for anyone. It was for himself, a way to stop the noise inside his head. The room was dim, the walls cracked and stained with time. The war outside had quieted for the night, but inside him, it never did. He placed the recorder on the table, stared at it for a long time, and finally spoke. His voice trembled at first, unsure, like someone learning to talk again after years of silence. To the man I killed today. Those were the first words. Then he paused. As if realizing the gravity of what he had just said, the rest spilled out like confession and punishment all at once. He said he started doing it after every mission, one tape after another. Each recording was a conversation with the dead, not to justify himself, but to understand them. He spoke their names when he knew them, described the look in their eyes, the way they fell, the small details no one else would ever remember. If their voices are gone, he whispered, then at least mine will. Remember them. It became a ritual, a strange form of prayer in a world that had forgotten mercy. He called it atonement through remembrance. Every confession was a thread connecting him to the people he destroyed. The tapes piled up, dozens, then hundreds. Sometimes he imagined them listening back, hearing his words carried by the wind across the ruins. He wondered if forgiveness could exist in frequencies, if the static between his sentences could reach beyond death. But the truth was, he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was trying to feel human again. As he listened to his own voice echoing back from the recorder, he noticed something strange. It didn't sound like him anymore. It was deeper, older, filled with the exhaustion of too many confessions. That's when he understood what guilt does. It doesn't scream. It rewrites your voice until it no longer belongs to you. He became a ghost, narrating his own downfall, trapped between repentance and despair. The tapes were supposed to save him, but in the end, they only preserved the part of him that refused to die. He said that sometimes, when he played them back, he heard things he hadn't said, whispers, breaths, faint murmurs between the pauses. Maybe it was interference, maybe it was memory itself talking back. Either way, he kept recording, because if he stopped it would mean the silence had won. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because those confessions, and what they began to reveal about the nature of guilt and redemption, led him to a truth more disturbing than any war story, a truth about the limits of forgiveness and the cost of living with your own conscience. He remembered a night when his commanding officer looked him in the eye and said, "Snipers don't think, they execute." It wasn't a reprimand, it was a rule, a survival mechanism disguised as discipline. Thinking, after all, was dangerous. It led to questions, hesitation, empathy, and empathy had no place on the battlefield. But for him, that sentence became a curse. Because once you've looked through a scope long enough, once you've seen the fragile line between life and death up close, you realize that not thinking is impossible. The mind doesn't turn off. It keeps recording, analyzing, replaying. It becomes its own weapon. He said that at first he tried to obey the rule, to follow orders, to shut down the noise in his head. But silence has its own voice, and soon it started speaking back. At night, when the world was still, he began to hear whispers, faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind, then clearer, closer. Sometimes it sounded like his own voice, whispering his name, reminding him of the choices he made. Other times it wasn't him at all. It was them, the ones who had fallen by his hand. Their words weren't angry, they were heavy with disappointment. You knew one of them would say in his mind, and you still pulled the trigger. He said it was like living between two realities. One where he was still a soldier, breathing, following orders, and another where he was already gone, swallowed by the guilt that had taken root inside him. The boundaries blurred until he couldn't tell which world was real anymore. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain that someone was standing in the dark corner of his room. Sometimes he spoke to them, as if apologizing could undo what he'd done. "You didn't deserve it," he would whisper, voice shaking, but no apology ever felt. "Enough. The mind," he said, "is the cruelest battlefield. It doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. The truth hidden behind every act of violence is that the conscience never dies with the war. It lingers, evolving into something unrecognizable." He started to see faces and reflections, shapes in the smoke, shadows that moved when he blinked, and in those moments he realized that the whispers weren't coming from the dead. They were coming from the part of himself he had tried to kill, the part that still felt, the human part. He once believed strength meant shutting out emotion, but now he understood that denying it was the very thing that destroyed him. His mental walls had become transparent, and the truth was seeping through the cracks. There was no difference between punishment and memory anymore. They had merged into one endless cycle. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because what happened next, when the line between his thoughts and the whispers finally disappeared, exposed a hidden side of the human mind, A revelation about how guilt doesn't just haunt us, it transforms us. He said there was one bullet he never used. It stayed hidden in a small compartment inside his case, polished, untouched, waiting. For years, he carried it with him like a secret, a reminder that one day he might need it, not for battle, but for silence. It was strange, he said, how something so small could hold the weight of so many decisions. Sometimes he'd take it out, hold it between his fingers, and imagine the relief it promised. Not peace, but an ending, a final act to close the story he no longer knew how to live in. The idea didn't come to him in despair. It came in clarity. After all the confessions, the sleepless nights, the endless whispering voices, he realized he wasn't afraid of dying, he was afraid of continuing to live with what he had become. That's when he made the decision. He would use the bullet, but not in the way everyone would expect. That morning, the light came through the window like it was trying to forgive him. The air was still, almost sacred. He sat by the table where he had made all his recordings, laid the rifle in front of him, and took a deep breath. Every sound in the room seemed amplified, the metallic click of the chamber, the slow rhythm of his heartbeat, the faint hum of the recorder still running. He looked at the bullet one last time, the reflection of light dancing across its surface, and whispered, "This is not for you, and not for me." He loaded the weapon, but instead of turning it toward himself, he lifted it upward, toward the open sky. For a moment he hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of reverence. Then, with a breath that sounded like surrender, he pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the empty landscape, cutting through the morning air like a confession finally released. It wasn't a cry for help, it was a declaration, the only way he knew how to speak to the world that had already forgotten him. He said the sound lingered longer than it should have, as if the sky itself was listening. The recoil burned his shoulder, grounding him in a moment that felt both real and unreal. And when the echo faded, there was silence again. Not the kind that haunted him before, but a new kind. Softer, cleaner. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment, it felt like understanding. He left the rifle where it fell and sat there, eyes closed as if waiting for the sound to reach somewhere far away. Maybe to the ones he had spoken to in his tapes, maybe to the little girl whose father would never come home. He didn't know if anyone would ever hear the echo, but it didn't matter. The act wasn't for forgiveness, it was to prove that even in the ruins of guilt, a man could still choose how his story ends. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because what that final act truly meant and how it redefined his understanding of redemption and identity reveals something powerful about the human condition, about the hidden need to find peace even when forgiveness seems impossible. The recording crackled back to life after a long stretch of static, the kind that sounds like the breath of a dying signal. Then, through the distortion, his voice returned quieter now, almost at peace, as if every word cost him a little of what was left. "If anyone hears this," he said, pausing between syllables, "don't become what I became. War doesn't end when the gunfire stops, it lives inside you." There was no bitterness in his tone, no anger, only a strange calm that comes when a man finally accepts the truth he's been running from. He spoke as though addressing someone specific, maybe a soldier yet to fight, maybe the little girl from the notebook, maybe anyone still naive enough to believe war leaves the living untouched. "They tell you the hardest part is pulling the trigger," he continued, "but it's not. The hardest part is everything that comes after, when the noise fades and you start hearing yourself again." His breathing was uneven now, the rhythm of a man fading between worlds. He wanted whoever was listening to understand that the real battle was never fought out there, it was inside, in the quiet spaces between guilt and memory. Every decision, every silence, carried its own consequence. He had learned too late that redemption isn't something you win, it's something you live with. And that was his final revelation, the truth hidden beneath all the uniforms, orders, and justifications, that humanity is both the weapon and the wound. The tape crackled again, the sound growing weaker, until his voice was little more than a whisper swallowed by static. But before it faded completely, there was one last breath, one last fragment of his confession, a faint echo that seemed to come not from the tape, but from somewhere deeper. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because the meaning behind those last words and what they reveal about memory, transformation, and the hidden cost of survival changes everything we thought we understood about guilt and redemption. If you're still here, listening to the last echoes of this story, then maybe it touched you in some way. And that means more than you can imagine. These stories, the ones that speak about guilt, redemption, and the fragile side of being human, they only matter because someone like you was willing to hear them all the way through. If this one you've stayed with you, leave a comment below and write, "I heard the last breath." It's a small phrase, but it tells me you felt what I was trying to share, not just the pain, but the truth behind it. And if you want to keep walking through stories like this, voices that reveal the unseen side of war, memory, and transformation, subscribe to the channel. That's how these confessions find new ears, how they stay alive beyond the silence. Don't forget to leave a like too. It's a quiet way of saying we're here, that this story meant something to you. There's another video right here that continues this reflection. Different story, same soul. Click it, and keep walking with me through the places where silence still has something to say.